Hello and welcome to the first ever episode of The Road to Purpose, an alternative men's self improvement podcast that gives young men actionable steps for growth without selling their soul in the process. If you're hearing this or you're watching this on YouTube, the chances are that you're just like I was a few years ago, without direction, lost, and maybe even vulnerable. And the truth is, there's a wealth of information out there for young men. It comes from multiple different sources. It could be influences, it could be religion, it could be from all over the place. And it's very difficult to filter through that information and find what fits for you. And the main purpose of this podcast is to establish that there is more than just one way of doing things. The route to growth is going to be different for everyone. And as far as I can see, having been around in the manosphere, having been around in self-improvement spaces for the last few years, there's not an influencer or there's not a guru who's really pushing this big truth that everyone is in fact different. And I'm honestly quite sick of it, which is why I've started up this podcast, which is why this pilot episode is going out there. And it's why I want to cultivate a community of young men who will find their own way to grow and will find goals that really reward what they want, as opposed to what fits into the marketing plan of certain influencers. Now, we're going to define in this podcast what your idea of masculinity should be, because the truth is, chances are you might be looking for a father figure or someone to guide you. And I think that young men are quite often in the situation where they'll gravitate to whoever speaks with conviction, whoever speaks and tells them clear instructions. But the truth is that this might not always be the correct route. There's not one cookie cutter approach, as I like to say. And certain influencers will tell you that their way is the best way and it's their way or the highway. And I really don't think you should listen to that. I really think that information is damaging. Because maybe what they're preaching to you will not benefit your life in the way that you want. And maybe it will not give you the level of satisfaction that you ultimately want to attain. And maybe you're not the same person as that influencer. Maybe you're cut out for something much greater. So in this podcast, I'd like to discuss the rise of certain role models in this community and certain influencers. Now, I'm new to podcasting. You'll see me glance to my left as I look at the image preview and down at my notes. This is going to get better with time. It's best to just hit record, is what they say. So please bear with me. I realize that the production quality of this is not perfect, but we're going to be pumping out episodes every week, multiple times a week, actually. And with time, this whole process is going to get smoother. My editing process will get better. My audio quality and things like that will get better as I invest in equipment. But the important thing to do is to get started, because I feel like this category of self-improvement does not exist yet. This category of self-improvement I have not come across. Encouraging people to grow into the person that they want to be rather than what a certain influencer wants them to be is unfounded territory. Is that even the way of saying it? Unfounded territory. And yeah, so let's talk about the influences that exist in this space right now. So I've observed a rise of very extremist male role models in this space, and the truth is they're all kind of preaching a very similar thing, and a lot of young men are in a very vulnerable place. They want a better quality of life, but they don't know how to attain it. And what these influencers do is they come along with a lot of materialism and a lot of wealth, and they basically just like flex on their audience. They basically flex on their audience and they say, hey, if you want this, you've got to do what I did. And they lay out these steps, which are with varying levels of ethical values. They lay out these steps and they create their courses and they sell them to their audience. And they say, if you want to become like me and you want all of this, which, let's be real, what vulnerable guy doesn't look at that? Oh, he's got 3 supercars. Oh, he's got a supermodel on his arm. Oh, he's got an abundance of money. He can live anywhere in the world. Who doesn't want to become like that? But the truth is that preaching this materialism and aiming for these materialistic goals will not ultimately provide you with the satisfaction that you're searching for. becoming becoming happy, being content with your life is so much more complex than that. And when I was in a position of feeling vulnerable and without direction, there was an influencer in particular who spoke to me called Hamza. Now, Hamza has recently, in the last 6 months, managed to throw away a lot of his fan base by preaching some very questionable things about his ex-girlfriend. And yeah, he's basically just given them quite a lot of bad advice, and people have kind of realized that there are certain topics that he's not qualified to give advice on. Shock. He's not the guru that everyone thought he was. Now, some of his advice from the early days, I think, is really sound, and it really resonated with me. So, for example, when I finished university, I had a very rough patch, without direction, struggling to find work and things like that. I was just in general, not very happy. And so through Hamza's content, I kind of got into the gym and things like that. Started working on building productive habits like meditation, journaling, and actually I've journaled quite a lot of notes before this podcast, and these are ideas that I want to convey. And journaling is a great way to summarize what you're thinking, and basically give you a lot more clarity. I've been journaling for a long time. I want to start a podcast, so here we are, finally executing on that. And so yeah, let's get back to some of these influences. So Hamza was the one which resonated with me. Now, I've met a lot of young men who have resonated with Andrew Tate, for example, and Andrew and Tristan Tate, and then you've got influencers like Sneeko and Fresh and Fit. And I'm going to be honest, I'm not massive fans of these people. I think they have some really valuable lessons within what they preach, but I would say the majority of it is there's a lot of marketing and sales to filter through before you find the actual productive message. So, okay, so how do these guys become big? Let's take Andrew Tate, for example, because he's the most popular and the most likely to read about him in the news and things like that. And there was the time when he was getting cancelled where everyone was talking about him and vulnerable young men. So how did Andrew Tate come to the level of fame that he has right now? So one of the clear marketing tactics that Andrew Tate uses is creating an out group. So young men are quite often full of a lot of aggression, and they might think that life is unfair. And the truth is that life is not actually that fair. There is a lot of truths that need to be accepted, but I don't think that the way that Andrew Tate says that young men should deal with that is potentially the correct way. So Andrew Tate creates this idea of the matrix, which is responsible for people working in systems, and he refers to people who are not on the entrepreneurship journey or have not woken up to this idea as NPCs and bots. Now, I find these words quite insulting. I really don't think that you should look at large populations of people like this. And I've met people in real life who do look at large populations of people like this, and it's extremely unbecoming. It makes you come across as a complete arsehole. Yeah, this is a crazy way of looking at the world, in my opinion. And so you've got people like Sneeko as well, who are just running the same message and trying to piggyback off the fame that Andrew Tate has. Now, there's this dream that's being sold to the audience that Andrew Tate does perfectly. And he did this by appearing on a lot of podcasts and getting all these clips. So people create clips of podcasts, right? And then suddenly he was appearing on a lot of podcasts, and there was a lot of clips going around of him just saying the most crazy stuff. And people were turning their heads what is this guy saying? This is so radical. He speaks with such conviction, and he is a great speaker, by the way. Let's credit him with that. He's an excellent speaker, and he speaks with such conviction. And the truth is that all of this, the way that he speaks, is driving you towards watching his content, and ultimately buying his products. He is a businessman. I think this is something that a lot of people miss. This guy goes out and says things that might resonate with angry young men. And they're looking for people to blame, right? They're looking for people to blame for their situation. Now, if a young guy is lonely, who might he blame for that? If he doesn't take accountability, he might blame women for this. So Andrew Tate, a lot of his clips are about, which could be construed as misogynistic, are about blaming women for these for a lot of problems in society, which is not a good thing to do, in my opinion. And so this really resonated with a lot of angry young men. And suddenly they become fans of Andrew Tate. They're watching a lot of his podcasts. And ultimately they decide, hang on, the way this guy's living is very appealing. I want to join this guy's private community, the real world. And suddenly they're paying $50 a month for this subscription. And who's making money off that? Andrew Tate. It's a genius business model. This guy is an expert in marketing, an expert in sales. And the truth is that these young guys are so desperate for change in their lives that they don't even realize that they're being sold to. And I really am not a fan of the whole influencers creating courses kind of trend that's occurred over the last few years, and probably even longer. There are these guys who are self-qualified experts, self-proclaimed experts even, and they'll create these courses which are usually ludicrously expensive. And then because they are good at sales and good at marketing, they then push that content on their audience, who are essentially vulnerable people. Now, I don't think it's fair to say that everyone in the audience is vulnerable, but I would say a large majority of young guys who consume this content are desperate for change in their life and sick of their life. And the truth is that these courses are quite often not the answer that these young men are looking for at all. So I think these guys speak in a polarizing way on purpose. They have very black and white opinions that make what they're preaching easy to remember, and you either fall in line with their beliefs or you don't. And it easily creates a divide. So suddenly you have this outgroup of people who don't agree with these quite radical opinions, and then you've got this in-group, which are the target market for these influencers, who are then going to be selling to this in-group. So I don't believe that true masculine men fall into this category of radical, what would be the word? Radical hustlers. I don't know if that's the right way to put it. But I don't really think that this is the definition of masculinity that young, vulnerable guys should actually be chasing. I think that there's a much better way of doing things, and I think the correct way of doing things is different for every person. Not every guy needs to be super jacked with a supermodel on his arm and 3 supercars and be living in Dubai. Like, that's not going to tick the boxes for everyone. Now, I know that's kind of an obvious thing to say, but a lot of the people who I have met who are fans of these influencers and actually live the lifestyle of chasing, or they're on the path of following this influencer's advice, they quite often are just exactly the same as each other. They have the same personality traits as Andrew Tate, because that's whose content they consume, and they claim that this guy is like life-changing for them. Now, maybe that's true. Maybe they've made a lot of money off of these rigid business models that exist in these communities. That's one thing to consider as well. If you join, for example, the real world, there's a number of sections. It's like a Discord server. There's a number of sections for business models, and a lot of people are running the same business models. Now, I did mention before that these models vary in levels of ethical value. So you have anything from drop shipping to running OnlyFans agencies and webcam agencies. And I've met people running OnlyFans and webcam agencies, and I mean, I'm not going to offer an opinion right here, but I personally wouldn't involve myself in that work. That's not something that interests me. It doesn't fit into my core values as a man, and I think that you're potentially taking advantage of not just young men, but also the women involved. So Yeah, you don't need to have a fast car and be super jacked to be masculine. This is not the idea of masculinity that is actually correct. So, which brings me kind of like to my next point. What is a masculine man? Now, I'd mentioned that this could be different for every person. What could be considered masculine is a very subjective opinion. Now, this is my take on it. I have an alternative, what I would consider more rational image of masculinity, and I believe that a masculine man. I've got a few points here. A masculine man is accountable for his actions and takes responsibility. This means that they don't look around for excuses as to why things are going wrong in their life and why they're not where they want to be. They accept that they are the reason that they're not where they want to be, and when things go wrong, they look for reasons that they could be to blame, as opposed to pointing the finger around. This is a mark of maturity, and actually a very underrated trait of people. If someone can take responsibility for their actions, that's the kind of person you want to be friends with. If someone, let's say they're in a fight and they go, actually, I might have provoked that person, and I probably could have avoided this whole situation if I hadn't made this comment, then that's a very mature way of looking at the situation, as opposed to going, "Oh, this guy shouldn't have responded like that," and then just like basically bitching around to everyone around them as to why they were involved in this situation and it's so unfair and everything like that. So a masculine man is accountable and responsible. A masculine man treats everyone from all backgrounds with respect, regardless of their perceived status. Status. I just said it like an American. I'm from the UK, in case you couldn't tell. Status. So, a masculine man will not look to gain something when they meet a new person. Now, I've networked in entrepreneur circles for quite a while, and there's a very like transactional way that people go about networking in those circles. And it's funny, I go into like a networking event, and quite often I end up chatting to someone who's not even involved in entrepreneurship. They're just there because they're interested in the topic. They're not actually an entrepreneur or something. And these connections are great to have. Like, you should look to learn a lesson from absolutely anyone, regardless of their perceived status. This is a very mature outlook on life, and people will really like you if they don't think that they're being sorted into a category when you come to meet them. I think it's a very charismatic trait to be open to learning a lesson from anyone. It's something I try to do. I'm not perfect at it at all. I hope I don't ever come across to someone as like condescending, or something like that in a networking situation, or even just meeting a new person. I believe that we're all on this level playing field, and you should treat everyone with equal respect, regardless of whatever status they have. And that's something else. You look at these influencers, and they put themselves up here. I was just out of shot there. They put themselves up here because of what they have in a material sense, and that's not a great gauge of where someone is. I've heard people involved in this like hustle culture movement talk about people of high level, and basically high level just means that they're making a lot of money. It means that they're further along in their business journey than the person who's well than that person than any of the people who are talking there. Someone is high level, and I don't really think that's a great way of looking at people. Oh, I want to be friends with that person because of what material objects they have. Not a great way of making friendships, in my opinion. Not a great way of navigating the world. I don't believe a masculine man navigates the world like that. What else does a masculine man do? Looks after his body and lives a healthy lifestyle. This does not mean, and I'd just like to reiterate, this does not mean you need to be jacked. Now, I think going to the gym, I do personally go to the gym myself, and I think it's a great habit to have. I think it's something you can really focus on individually, and you can do it anywhere in the world. I travel around a lot. I've been living as a digital nomad for the last like 6 months or so, and this is a great habit to have because I can walk into a gym anywhere and perform an basically identical workout wherever I am in the world. It's a great habit to build, but you don't need to be jacked to be masculine. You could also just be fit and healthy. Like, I think it's equally impressive if someone can run a marathon that if they can bench press 100 kg. Like, these are things that are different levels, and people's bodies are cut out for different things. If you're naturally very like chunky and you have that kind of physique, maybe you would be better off working on some kind of bodybuilding program. Maybe if you're a bit more skinny like me, it would be good to combine it with some cardio and to play sports. But my point is that a masculine man let does not let himself become unhealthy. That's actually quite a easy thing to maintain if you think about it. Just doing some kind of physical activity will keep you in good shape, and eating a good diet. So a masculine man also is ambitious towards meaningful goals. Meaningful goals are goals that are going to improve his life and the lives of the people immediately around him. And these goals have to be ethical. If you're involved in working towards goals that are just like slapping other people down in the process or taking advantage of other people in the process, then I think this is a very weak characteristic, personally. I hope that this is resonating with anyone listening out there. I apologize if the format of this podcast seems a bit crazy and all over the place. This is my first time recording this style of podcast, so I hope this is resonating. But these goals need to be towards some kind of like greater purpose, towards the purpose of the man and the people around him. So that could be goals of like building a family and creating a good setup for said family and creating a good lifestyle for your like immediate circle. This is I consider this a very masculine trait, to be that leader, to be the person who takes responsibility and says, I'm going to look after everyone else. I'm going to look after my family, and I'm going to make sure that they don't live in poor conditions. Which leads me to my next point. A masculine man is a positive father figure and is actively interested in becoming a father, and not just a father figure to necessarily his future children, but a father figure and mentor to the people around him. So a father figure will look after friends, look after close friends and look after family. A father figure is so much more than just having a family, although this is, in my opinion, an ideal outcome. Personally, I would love to become a father one day. I hope I have that opportunity. And well, I will find a way to have that opportunity. And yeah, I feel like these are the kind of goals that young men should be working towards, as opposed to having a Lamborghini in the garage and moving to Dubai and sleeping with lots and lots of women. And my final point on here is to be ethical and fair in all practices. I recently made a document for myself called a personal manifesto, which another entrepreneur that I met gave me this idea. And the idea basically is to look 20 years into the future and kind of create an image of the life that you'd like to be living in that moment. And one of the things I wrote down was that all of my practices up to that point need to have been ethical and fair. Because if I've built wealth off of actions that are unethical, then I'm going to feel a level of guilt. And I don't want to feel that level of guilt. But I think a good man, and I would consider it a masculine trait of a man, is someone who is conscious of that and someone who doesn't want to engage in unethical practices or basically screw other people over. I'm basically yet to find a section of the manosphere which speaks in this way. It always seems to be the same messages that are coming out, like, you need to build a 6-figure business. And there's this other thing, right? I've been into entrepreneurial circles for a while, and there's this magic number of 10K a month, $10,000 a month. What are you going to do with $10,000 a month, man? Like, it's like, oh, start your business and grow it to 10K a month. It's like, then what? No. there's this cookie cutter content that resonates with a vulnerable audience, and once you've seen it, once you've seen how it's affecting certain groups of people, and you've perhaps even met people who are on this journey where they're like, I'm going to make it, I'm going to make it, I'm going to get to 10K a month. Some of them do, a lot fail. That's the truth. And yeah, it seems very sad, actually. And I feel like a lot of young men are really being manipulated by this content and they don't even realize it. It fills them with this like fake ambition to get somewhere. I mean, it is just ambition. Um, these are ambitious young men, really, and they're looking for something they can resonate with. And yeah, I don't see a, like a section of the manosphere which is taking a young man's dreams and asking them genuinely, what do you want from your life? And then helping them work towards that. And what level would you actually be content with? Because the level you'd actually be content with is very important. So it has to be personal. There's not this one size fits all solution. So going forward with my content, I've just listed a lot of things that I would consider more important values of masculinity. You might disagree with them, and I would love to hear in the comments section of this podcast what you think of what values I put together there. If you look at those and you go, no, actually, I disagree with this, or I would add this, please let me know. I'm basically running a continuous integration, continuous feedback loop on this podcast, and the comments I receive will help to make this podcast even better. I want to build a community, as I mentioned. That will be coming very soon. It will likely be a Telegram community of young men who are interested in working towards their personalized goals, as opposed to these cookie cutter goals that every single influencer in this space seems to be preaching and trying to build basically a load of hype off based off of what other influencers are doing. It's time for something different. It's time for a new age of this men's self-improvement category, because honestly, this is not working. This is not working. And the area of men's self-improvement is now being associated with very hateful content. And I don't think that's fair. I don't think that's fair at all. So I think also a lot of these guys who are watching a lot of these red pill influencers, they're creating a lot of hate in their head, and it's creating a lot of hate towards certain groups. So women being the obvious one. I think red pill content, especially in this space, fresh and fit, that podcast is appalling. Like if you look at that podcast and don't see an obvious issue with that, I think you might be listening to the wrong podcast right now, man. How can you not see an obvious issue with that? Filling a room with basically a load of escorts and then just like telling them why they're sluts. Like that is absolutely appalling. And yeah, that's disgraceful. So yeah, these red pill influencers are quite often just driving a lot of hate towards certain groups, and this idea of the matrix as well. I think this is actually quite a limiting belief. This is something that could limit your growth in life if you're constantly paranoid about the fact that, oh wait, if you work a normal job, then you're actually in the matrix. I don't believe that. I think there's some pretty diabolical systems that are out there, which if you want to call that the matrix, then fine, be my guest. But I personally don't think that's a healthy image to have of the world. So a lot of these ideas, like the matrix, women being bad, these are scapegoats, and they're scapegoats for a lot of the obvious problems in young men's life. And the messages that these influencers are conveying are conveyed with such conviction, and I think this is just mass manipulation of an audience, if I'm being completely honest. And you have to remember that at the end of the day, these guys are trying to make money. They're trying to drive you towards their courses. They're trying to drive you towards basically products that they're selling. I personally have heard of a lot of the courses that like Andrew Tate sells, and I think some of them are pretty despicable actually. The OnlyFans agency one stands out in particular. There's one on how to what is it? It's how to. I think it's a pickup course. I'm pretty sure there's a pickup course. I don't want to say specifically what the content is, but I've just heard some things. I'm not gonna give a too much of a solid opinion on that one actually. So yeah, the main takeaway from this first episode is I believe that a route to improve your life should be personal, and I'm going to reiterate this again. There is no cookie cutter way for every young man to improve their life. It's not going to provide you with the satisfaction that you're searching for. There's no one size fits all approach. And I think the sooner the young men realize this, and if you're coming across this podcast, I hope that this is, if you take away one thing from this podcast, please take away that. Please take away that there is not one size fits all approach, and you getting jacked in the gym, more women might not necessarily be for you what provides you with satisfaction. You might be the person who like really, really searches for a long-term committed relationship, monogamous relationship. And yeah, that's I think I'm going to round it up here. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching if you're watching on YouTube. And yeah, until next time.